The screams of Katherine Blackwell echoed across the dusty Wyoming street as the back of Edward Thompson's hand connected with her face for the third time. Blood trickled from her split lip, staining the collar of her cream dress crimson as she stumbled backward against the wooden post of her father's general store. It was 1878, and in the frontier town of Red Rock, a woman's refusal of marriage was considered not just an insult, but a public offense worthy of punishment. "You'll accept my proposal, Katherine, or so help me God. I'll make you regret the day you were born," Edward snarled, his face contorted with rage as he raised his hand again. His expensive suit and polished boots marked him as the wealthiest rancher in the county, a man used to getting whatever he wanted. Katherine wiped the blood from her mouth with trembling fingers. At 22, she had spent her entire life in this town, working in her father's store since her mother's death 5 years ago. But she would rather die than marry this cruel man who had been terrorizing her for months. "I would rather marry a rattlesnake," she spat, her blue eyes blazing despite the fear gripping her heart. "At least it would be honest about its intentions to kill me." Edward's face darkened as the small crowd that had gathered watched in silent horror. No one dared intervene. Thompson owned half the businesses in town and had the sheriff in his pocket. Katherine's father was away on a supply run to Cheyenne, leaving her with no protection. "You insolent little—" Edward's words were cut short as a deep voice sliced through the tense air. "That's enough." The crowd parted as a tall figure strode forward. Katherine had never seen him before. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his worn Stetson, but she could make out a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. Dust coated his leather vest and denim pants, evidence of long days on the trail. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster worn from use but the revolver gleaming with care. "This ain't your business, stranger," Edward growled, turning to face the newcomer. "Move along if you value your life." The stranger's eyes flickered briefly to Katherine before returning to Edward. When a man raises his hand to a woman in public, he makes it everyone's business. His voice was calm but carried an underlying steel that caused several onlookers to take a step back. Katherine could now see his eyes, a piercing gray-green that reminded her of storm clouds over the mountains. Edward's hand moved toward the pistol at his side. "Do you know who I am?" The stranger didn't flinch. "A coward who beats women. That's all I need to know." The next few moments passed in a blur. Edward drew his gun, but the stranger moved with a speed that defied belief. Before Thompson's pistol cleared its holster, the stranger's fist connected with his jaw in a devastating blow. Edward crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the dirt. Katherine swayed on her feet, the events of the day and her injuries taking their toll. The world tilted around her as darkness crowded the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was strong arms catching her as she fell, and the stranger's voice calling out urgently for water. When Katherine regained consciousness, the rhythmic motion beneath her confused her senses. She was moving, but not by her own power. The scent of leather, tobacco, and pine filled her nostrils. Opening her eyes, she found herself cradled against a broad chest, seated sideways on a horse that was cantering steadily across the open prairie. "You're awake," the stranger said, his voice rumbling through his chest against her ear. "Good. I was starting to worry." Katherine tried to sit up straighter, wincing as pain shot through her head. Where are you taking me?" "Away from that town," he replied simply. "Thompson has too many friends there. It wasn't safe for you to stay." Katherine touched her swollen lip gingerly. "You kidnapped me." The corner of the stranger's mouth lifted slightly. "I prefer rescued, but you're welcome to your interpretation." As the horse continued its steady pace, Katherine studied her rescuer's profile. His nose had been broken at least once, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his features, a kind of weathered strength that spoke of hardship overcome. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Zachary Vance, Katherine Blackwell," she offered in return. "I know, the storekeeper's daughter." His eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "I heard Thompson talking about you in the saloon last night, bragging that he'd make you his wife by the end of the week, willing or not." Katherine shuddered. "Where are we going, Mr. Vance?" "There's a homestead about a day's ride from here. Belongs to an old friend of mine. You'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next." Katherine wanted to argue, to demand he take her back to town to wait for her father's return, but the memory of Edward's rage and the town's silent complicity stopped her. Instead, she asked, "Why did you help me? You don't know me." Zachary was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I've seen what happens when no one steps in to help. I wasn't going to stand by and watch it happen again." There was a story there, Katherine sensed, but she didn't press. The pain in her head was intensifying, and she found herself leaning more heavily against his chest. "I should thank you," she murmured, "though being carried off by a stranger wasn't exactly how I planned to spend my day." His chuckle was a low, pleasant sound. "Rest. We've got a long ride ahead." Katherine wanted to protest that she was fine, but exhaustion claimed her before she could form the words. When she woke again, the sun was setting, painting the vast Wyoming sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Zachary had stopped by a small creek sheltered by cottonwood trees. He helped her down from the horse with careful hands, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. "How's your head?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's been better," she admitted, "but I'll survive." Zachary nodded and busied himself with setting up a small camp. Katherine watched as he efficiently unrolled bedding, gathered wood for a fire, and tended to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed as sturdy and dependable as its owner. "Have you been a cowboy long?" she asked as he built a small fire. "Since I was 16, he replied, striking a match. "Worked on ranches across 4 territories, drove cattle from Texas to Montana. And now," Zachary poked at the growing flames, "now I drift, take work where I can find it, was heading to Fort Laramie when I stopped in your town." "So you're a drifter who just happened to save me from an unwanted marriage proposal," Katherine said, attempting to lighten the mood. His eyes met hers across the fire, serious despite her teasing tone. "That wasn't a proposal, Miss Blackwell. That was a man trying to claim ownership of you." The bluntness of his statement silenced her. He was right, of course. Edward Thompson had never asked for her hand, he had demanded it, believing his wealth and position entitled him to whatever he desired, including her. Zachary handed her a tin cup of coffee and a small piece of jerky. "It's not much, but it'll keep you going until morning." Katherine accepted both gratefully. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it helped clear the fog from her mind. "My father will be worried sick when he returns. Once we reach my friend's place, I can ride to the next town and send word to him." "And what then? I can't hide forever." Katherine's fingers tightened around the cup. "Thompson won't give up. He's not used to being denied." "Men like Thompson only understand one thing," Zachary said, his voice hardening, "and it isn't polite refusal." "Violence, you mean?" Katherine frowned. "I won't have anyone else hurt because of me." Zachary studied her for a long moment. "There are other ways to handle men like him. But you need time and distance first." Katherine wanted to press for details, but exhaustion was once again creeping over her. Zachary seemed to notice, offering her the only bedroll without comment. "I can't take your bed," she protested. "I've slept on harder ground with less cause," he replied simply. "Take it. You need the rest more than I do." Too tired to argue further, Katherine curled up on the bedroll, pulling the rough blanket around her shoulders. Despite her circumstances, miles from home with a man she barely knew, she felt oddly safe. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Zachary's silhouette against the night sky, his rifle across his knees as he kept watch. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Katherine woke to find Zachary already breaking camp, his movements quiet as if trying not to disturb her. "How long until we reach your friend's homestead?" she asked, rising stiffly from the bedroll. "We should get there by midday if we keep a good pace," he replied, offering her a canteen of water. "How are you feeling?" Katherine touched her lip gingerly. The swelling had gone down somewhat, but the bruise on her cheek still throbbed painfully. "I'll live." "You're tougher than you look," Zachary observed, the faintest hint of admiration in his voice. "Growing up without a mother in a frontier town teaches you resilience," she replied, helping him pack up the camp. "And working in my father's store taught me how to handle difficult men." Though I admit, Edward Thompson tested those skills to their limit. Zachary's jaw tightened at the mention of Thompson's name. Men who strike women deserve a special place in hell. There was that same pain in his voice that Katherine had noticed the day before. She found herself wondering what experiences had shaped this quiet, intense man who had risked his life for a stranger. They rode in companionable silence for most of the morning. Unlike the day before, Katherine now sat behind Zachary, her arms wrapped hesitantly around his waist. The vast landscape stretched around them, rolling hills covered in tall grass, distant mountains purple against the horizon, and an endless blue sky overhead. "It's beautiful," Katherine murmured, almost to herself. Zachary glanced back at her. "You've never left Red Rock," she shook her head. "My father always promised we'd travel someday, see Denver or even San Francisco. But after Mother died, the store demanded all our attention." "And what would you have done if you'd married Thompson?" Zachary asked. "Would you have been content as a rancher's wife?" "I never considered marrying him," Katherine replied firmly. "Not for a single moment. He decided I would be his wife because I was the only unmarried woman in town who could read and write and knew how to manage accounts." Zachary's shoulders shook with a silent chuckle. "A practical reason for courtship if I ever heard one." "There was no courtship," Katherine corrected. "Only demands and threats, and finally—" She trailed off, her hand unconsciously touching her bruised cheek. Zachary's body tensed beneath her hands. "You deserve better," he said quietly. Something about the sincerity in his voice made Katherine's heart beat faster. She was saved from having to respond when Zachary pointed toward a distant plume of smoke rising from a valley ahead. "There it is, Sarah and Daniel's place." As they approached, Katherine could make out a modest but well-maintained homestead, a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a small barn, and fields of wheat and corn stretching behind it. A woman stepped out onto the porch as they rode up, shading her eyes against the midday sun. "Zachary Vance, is that you?" she called, her face breaking into a wide smile. She was in her early 30s with dark hair streaked with gray and laugh lines around her eyes. "Hello, Sarah," Zachary replied, dismounting and helping Katherine down after him. "Hope you don't mind unexpected visitors." Sarah's eyes widened as she took in Katherine's bruised face. "Lord above, what happened to this poor girl?" Zachary quickly explained the situation while Sarah ushered them inside. The cabin was warm and welcoming, filled with the scent of baking bread and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. A tall, bearded man entered from the back room, drying his hands on a towel. "Zach." "Been too long," he greeted, clapping Zachary on the shoulder before turning concerned eyes to Katherine. Daniel Parker, he introduced himself with a gentle nod. Katherine Blackwell, she replied, suddenly self-conscious of her disheveled appearance and bruised face. Sarah's motherly instincts took over immediately. Daniel, fetch some hot water. Zachary, I'm sure you remember where the barn is. Make yourself useful while I tend to this young lady. The men retreated, leaving Katherine alone with Sarah, who led her to a small bedroom off the main living area. Let's get you cleaned up and into some fresh clothes, Sarah said kindly. Then you can tell me your side of what happened. The next hour was a blur of warm water, clean clothes, and gentle hands tending to Katherine's injuries. Sarah listened without interruption as Katherine explained about Edward Thompson, her father's absence, and Zachary's unexpected intervention. That sounds like Zach, Sarah said, applying a soothing salve to Katherine's bruised cheek. Always charging in to right wrongs. Been that way since we were children. You've known him a long time, Katherine asked, curious about her mysterious rescuer. Sarah nodded. Since we were young. We grew up on neighboring farms in Missouri before the war. His father and mine both fought for the Union. Only Zach's came back. Her eyes grew distant. He's had a hard life, that boy. Lost his mother to consumption when he was 12. Then his father was killed in a dispute over water rights when Zach was 18. He mentioned he's been a cowboy since he was 16, Katherine said. Had to grow up fast, Sarah confirmed, but he's a good man, one of the best I know. She gave Katherine a shrewd look, and he doesn't usually go around rescuing young women from unwanted suitors. You must have made quite an impression. Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. He was just being decent. Sarah's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise, but she didn't press the issue. Rest here for a bit. I'll call you when supper's ready. Left alone, Katherine sank onto the narrow bed, her mind spinning with everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had gone from being a shopkeeper's daughter to a woman on the run, rescued by a cowboy she knew almost nothing about. And yet, despite the uncertainty of her situation, she felt safer than she had in months. The sound of men's voices drew her to the small window. In the yard, Zachary and Daniel were working together to repair a section of fence, their movements easy and familiar, like old friends who had never been apart. As she watched, Zachary threw his head back in laughter at something Daniel said, and Katherine found herself transfixed by the transformation. The serious, vigilant man who had protected her was suddenly younger, lighter, his face open and carefree. Something stirred in Katherine's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with her injuries or the trauma of the previous day. She stepped away from the window, unsettled by her reaction to a man she had known for barely a day. Supper that evening was a simple but hearty affair: venison stew, fresh bread, and garden vegetables. Katherine found herself seated beside Zachary at the rustic table, acutely aware of his presence. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as they ate, "about your situation, Miss Blackwell." "Please call me Katherine," she insisted. Daniel nodded. "Katherine, then. This Thompson fellow sounds like bad news, and from what Zach tells me, he's got influence in your town. The sheriff won't cross him," Zachary added. "And if your father stands against him, he could lose his store or worse." Katherine's appetite vanished. "So what can I do? I can't hide here forever." "You could press charges in the territorial court," Daniel suggested. "Assault is still a crime even for wealthy men." "With what witnesses?" Zachary countered. "No one in that town will speak against Thompson." "I would," Katherine said firmly. "And you were there, Zachary. The word of a drifter against one of the most powerful men in the county." Zachary shook his head. "It wouldn't end well." Sarah reached across the table and patted Catherine's hand. "There's no need to decide anything tonight. You're safe here for as long as you need to be." The conversation shifted to lighter topics: Daniel's wheat crop, news from the nearest town, and stories from Sarah and Zachary's childhood. Despite her worries, Catherine found herself laughing at their tales, drawn into the warm atmosphere of the Parker home. Later, as Sarah showed her to a small bedroom in the loft, Catherine asked, "Where will Zachary sleep?" "In the barn," Sarah replied. "He insisted, said he's used to it." She hesitated, then added, "He cares for you, you know. I haven't seen him look at anyone that way in a long time." Before Catherine could ask what she meant, Sarah bid her good night, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the distant sound of an owl hooting in the darkness. The next morning, Catherine woke early, her body still accustomed to the pre-dawn schedule of running her father's store. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, careful not to wake Sarah and Daniel. On impulse, she slipped outside into the cool morning air. The sky was just beginning to lighten, a pale band of gold emerging on the horizon. Catherine wrapped her borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders and headed toward the barn, drawn by the soft glow of a lantern visible through the partially open door. Zachary sat on a bale of hay, cleaning his revolver with methodical precision. He looked up as Catherine entered, surprise flickering across his face. "You're up early," he said, setting aside his cleaning cloth. "Old habits," she replied, hovering awkwardly by the door. "I hope I'm not intruding." Zachary shook his head and gestured to the hay bale beside him. "Not at all." Catherine settled next to him, suddenly uncertain why she had sought him out. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the occasional stamping of horses in their stalls and the distant crow of a rooster. "I never properly thanked you," she finally said. "For what you did in town, you could have been killed." Zachary reassembled his revolver with practiced ease. "I've faced worse odds. Still, you risked your life for a stranger. I owe you a debt I can't repay." He looked at her then, his gray-green eyes serious. "You don't owe me anything, Catherine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart skip. "Sarah told me about your parents," she said softly. "I'm sorry." Zachary holstered his weapon and stood, moving to check on his horse. "It was a long time ago." "Is that why you became a drifter? Because there was nothing holding you in one place?" His back stiffened, but when he turned to face her, his expression was calm. "Partly. And partly because I've never found a place that felt like home, not since." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Catherine said, rising to her feet. "You know so much about me, but I know almost nothing about you." Zachary ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "There's not much to tell. I've been riding the range for 12 years. Worked as a ranch hand, a cattle driver, occasionally as a shotgun guard for stagecoaches. And never settled down." Catherine asked, moving closer. "Never found someone to share your life with?" The look he gave her was so raw that Catherine nearly took a step back. "Once," he admitted. 5 years ago in Colorado, she was a school teacher in a mining town where I was working. Mary." His voice softened on the name. "We were to be married that spring." Catherine's heart constricted. "What happened?" "Influenza swept through the town, took half the children in her school and her." Zachary's gaze was fixed on something far away. "After that, it seemed easier to keep moving. Not to put down roots that could be torn up." Without thinking, Catherine reached out and touched his arm. "I'm so sorry, Zachary." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. "Life out here is hard, Catherine, especially for women. I've seen too many good people broken by it." "Is that what you think will happen to me?" she asked. "I think you're stronger than most," he replied. "But Thompson won't give up easily. Men like him consider rejection a challenge, not an answer. Catherine's jaw set stubbornly. Then he'll be disappointed. I won't be bullied into marriage, not by him or anyone else. A ghost of a smile touched Zachary's lips. No, I don't imagine you will. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unnamed but palpable. Katherine became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his arm beneath her fingers, of how his eyes had darkened as they looked at her. The spell was broken by Daniel's voice calling from the house, announcing that breakfast was ready. Zachary stepped back, creating distance between them. "We should go in," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Katherine nodded, unable to trust her own voice. As they walked back to the cabin together, she wondered at the confusing emotions swirling within her. She had known this man for barely 2 days, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. Over breakfast, Zachary announced his plan to ride to the nearest telegraph office to send word to Catherine's father. "It's about 20 miles to Riverton," Daniel said. "You could make it there and back by nightfall if you push hard." "I'll leave right after breakfast," Zachary confirmed. He turned to Katherine. "What should I tell your father?" Katherine considered carefully. "Tell him I'm safe but cannot return until the situation with Thompson is resolved. Ask him to meet us in Riverton in 3 days' time." Zachary nodded. "And then we'll decide what to do about Edward Thompson." After Zachary departed, Katherine spent the day helping Sarah around the homestead. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her tumultuous thoughts. She found herself watching the horizon throughout the day, counting the hours until Zachary's return. "He'll be back," Sarah said knowingly as they hung laundry in the afternoon sun. "That man wouldn't leave you unprotected." Katherine blushed. "I'm not. We're not." She struggled to find the right words. Sarah's eyes were kind. "I've known Zachary Vance since he was a boy with skinned knees and big dreams. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Mary." "He told you about her?" Katherine asked, surprised. "He didn't have to." "Word travels even out here." Sarah pinned a sheet to the line. "It nearly destroyed him, losing her like that. He blamed himself for not being able to save her." "That's ridiculous," Katherine protested. "No one can stop influenza. Grief isn't rational," Sarah replied simply. "And Zach has always carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, too responsible for his own good." She gave Katherine a considering look. "But there's something different about him now, a lightness I haven't seen in years." Katherine didn't know how to respond to that. Instead, she asked, "Do you think I'm foolish, feeling drawn to a man I've known such a short time?" Sarah laughed softly. "Out here, life moves differently. Decisions that would take months back east often happen in days. When you find something good, you hold on to it with both hands." The sun was setting when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Katherine's heart leaped as Zachary rode into the yard, his horse dusty from the long journey. He dismounted wearily but straightened when he saw her waiting on the porch. "Your father will meet us in Riverton," he reported, removing his hat. "And he's bringing the territorial marshal with him." Katherine's eyes widened. "Marshal Jenkins? How did he convince him to come?" "Apparently, Thompson has made enemies beyond Red Rock. The marshal has been looking for a reason to investigate him for some time." Zachary looked satisfied. "Your father thinks there's enough evidence of corruption and intimidation to bring charges against Thompson, regardless of what happened to you." Relief washed over Katherine. "So it might be over. I might be able to go home." Something flickered in Zachary's eyes, disappointment perhaps. But he nodded. "If the marshal does his job, Thompson will face justice and you'll be safe." That night after supper, Katherine found herself unable to sleep. The possibility of returning home should have brought comfort, but instead it left her restless and conflicted. After tossing and turning for hours, she finally rose and made her way quietly downstairs and out onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Katherine wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and leaned against the porch railing, breathing in the cool air scented with pine and sage. "Couldn't sleep." Zachary's voice came from the shadows. He sat in a chair at the far end of the porch, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "Too much on my mind," she admitted, moving to join him. He offered her the other chair. "Worried about seeing your father?" "No." Katherine settled into the seat. "Worried about what comes after." Zachary studied her in the moonlight. "You can rebuild your life in Red Rock. Once Thompson is dealt with, things will go back to normal." "That's what I'm afraid of," she said softly. "Going back to the same life, the same routine, working in the store until I'm old and gray." She looked up at the vast sky above them. "These past few days have shown me there's so much more out there." "The frontier isn't kind to dreamers," Zachary warned. "Is that why you keep moving? To avoid dreams that might be broken?" He flicked his cigarette into the dirt. "Maybe I just haven't found a dream worth stopping for." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Katherine felt as though something important hung in the balance. "And if you did?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zachary leaned forward, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Katherine," he began, but whatever he meant to say was lost as the door opened behind them. Daniel appeared, rifle in hand. "Riders coming," he said tensely. "At least 3 moving fast." Zachary was on his feet instantly, hand going to his gun. "Get inside," he ordered Katherine. "Now." Heart pounding, she obeyed, watching from the window as Zachary and Daniel positioned themselves on either side of the porch, weapons ready. Sarah joined her, a shotgun cradled in her arms. "Stay away from the windows," Sarah advised, her voice calm despite the tension. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, then stopped at the edge of the property. A voice called out in the darkness. "Zachary Vance, I know you're in there, and I know you have what belongs to me." Katherine's blood ran cold. "Edward Thompson. How did he find us?" she whispered. "Doesn't matter now," Sarah replied grimly. "Daniel and Zach won't let him take you." Outside, Zachary's voice rang out clear and steady. "She doesn't belong to you or anyone else, Thompson. Ride away while you still can." Thompson's laugh was ugly. "I've got 3 men with me, Vance. You're outnumbered." 4 against 2, Daniel added quietly. "Not good odds." Katherine couldn't bear it. These people had risked everything to help her. She couldn't let them die for her sake. Before Sarah could stop her, she moved to the door. "Katherine, don't," Sarah began, but Katherine cut her off. "I can't let anyone else get hurt because of me," she said, her mind made up. "Maybe I can reason with him." "That man doesn't understand reason," Sarah argued, but Katherine was already stepping onto the porch. "Edward," she called out, ignoring Zachary's look of dismay. "This has gone far enough. There's a territorial marshal on his way. Whatever you do now will only make things worse for you." Thompson's figure was visible in the moonlight, flanked by 3 men on horseback. "You think I'm afraid of some marshal?" he sneered. "I own half the territory. No one will touch me." "You're wrong," Katherine replied steadily. "Your time of bullying and intimidation is over. Go home, Edward." "It's finished." Thompson's face contorted with rage. "It's finished when I say it's finished." He drew his gun, aiming directly at Katherine. "If I can't have you, no one will." Everything happened at once. Zachary lunged for Katherine, pushing her down as a shot rang out. Daniel fired back, the sound deafening in the night air. More shots followed in rapid succession. Katherine heard Sarah scream, felt Zachary's weight above her, shielding her with his body. Then, abruptly, silence fell. "Zach, you hit." Daniel's voice was tight with concern. "I'm fine," Zachary answered, though Katherine could feel him wince as he moved. Katherine, not hurt, she managed, her voice shaking. What happened? Zachary helped her to her feet as Daniel cautiously approached the riders. One horse had bolted and two figures lay motionless on the ground. A third man was clutching his arm, moaning in pain. Thompson, Zachary asked. Daniel knelt beside one of the fallen men. Dead, took a shot right through the heart. He checked the other body, this one too. The third's just winged. Katherine sagged against Zachary, overwhelmed by the realization that Edward Thompson would never threaten her again. It's over, she whispered. It's over, Zachary confirmed, his arm tightening around her waist. Then he hissed in pain, his hand going to his side. You are hit, Katherine accused, suddenly noticing the dark stain spreading across his shirt. Just grazed me, he dismissed, but his face was pale in the moonlight. Inside now, Sarah ordered, taking charge. Daniel, tie up that one and put him in the root cellar. I'll tend to Zach. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah cleaned and bandaged Zachary's wound, a bullet graze along his ribs that looked worse than it was. Daniel secured their prisoner and brought in the bodies of Thompson and his man, covering them with tarps behind the barn until they could be properly dealt with. By dawn, exhaustion had claimed them all. Daniel insisted on keeping watch while the others rested. Katherine refused to leave Zachary's side, sitting beside the bed where he lay in the small guest room. You should sleep, he told her, his voice rough with pain and fatigue. So should you, she countered, adjusting the blanket over him. Zachary caught her hand, his fingers warm against hers. Why did you come out onto that porch? He could have killed you. I couldn't let you die for me, Katherine said simply. Any of you. I would have, Zachary admitted, his eyes holding hers, without hesitation. Katherine's breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. Why? Instead of answering, he tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer. When his lips met hers, the kiss was soft, questioning a beginning rather than a demand. Katherine responded without hesitation, her free hand coming up to touch his face. When they parted, Zachary's expression was more open than she had ever seen it. Because in 3 days, you've become more important to me than anything has been in years, he said quietly. And that terrifies me. It terrifies me too, Katherine confessed. Everything is happening so fast. Too fast? He asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Katherine shook her head. No, just unexpected. 3 days ago I thought my life was set on one path. Now everything has changed. What do you want, Katherine? Zachary asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Once your father arrives, you could go back to Red Rock, rebuild your life there. She considered his question carefully. I want to stop being afraid, she finally said. I want to see more of this beautiful, terrible world. I want. She hesitated, then finished with simple honesty. I want to know you, Zachary Vance. Not just the man who rescued me, but the man you are when you're not rushing into danger. A smile spread slowly across his face, transforming his features. That might take some time. I have time, she replied, returning his smile. Unless you're planning to drift away again, Zachary shook his head. Not without you. Not unless you want me to. 3 days later, Katherine stood with Zachary on the porch of the Parker homestead, watching as a wagon approached in the distance. Her father had telegraphed from Riverton, confirming he was on his way with Marshal Jenkins. Are you nervous? Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders. A little, she admitted. I haven't seen my father since. She gestured vaguely at her face where the bruises were now fading to yellow. He'll just be glad you're safe, Zachary assured her. Katherine looked up at him, still marveling at how quickly and completely he had become essential to her. The past days had been filled with long conversations, shared stories, and a deepening connection that neither had expected but both embraced. "What will you tell him about us?" Zachary asked, the question that had been hovering between them finally spoken aloud. "The truth," Katherine said firmly. "That I've found someone I want to build a future with. That love sometimes happens in the most unexpected ways." Zachary's eyes softened. "Love, is it?" Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks but didn't look away. "Yes," she said simply. "Love." He bent and kissed her, gentle but sure. "Good," he murmured against her lips. "Because I love you too, Katherine Blackwell, and I'm done drifting." As the wagon drew closer, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The future held uncertainty, yes, but also promise. She had survived Edward Thompson's brutality and found unexpected strength within herself. And somehow, in the midst of danger and chaos, she had found a love worth stopping for. The woman who had been beaten for refusing a marriage had found her own path to happiness, carried away in the arms of a cowboy who had finally found his home.